Chapter 27, the reproductive system. So let's start by looking at the organization of the reproductive system and looking at the sex organs or the gonads. These would be the testes in the male and the ovaries in the female. So their function is to produce the gametes, sperm, by the male, and oocytes, or ova, or eggs, by the female, and then the associated sex hormones. And then the function of producing gametes is for fertilization in the sense of sexual reproduction. And fertilization is the fusion of the gametes, or the fusion of the genetic material of the gametes, which leads to a zygote, which is a fertilized egg, and that occurs within the female's reproductive tract. So the reproductive tracts, these are ducts that store and transport gametes. And we'll talk about accessory glands and organs. And basically they're adding fluids to the reproductive tract to help ensure delivery of the male gamete and fertilization of the female gamete. And then the external genitalia are found in the perineal structures for reproduction, for basically delivery of the male gamete sperm within the female reproductive tract. And then many reproductive structures have developed and derived from common developmental structures embryologically. And we'll see that there's a very similar early embryological developmental sequence in males and females until the hormones take over, and then one developmental pathway would be male and the other female in general. And because of this, there's numerous homologous structures. So homologous structure is a structure that has a common developmental background or origin. So the perineum is the area located between the thighs in the male and the female, and it's bounded by the pubic symphysis. So the perineum, again, is the area between the thighs bounded by the pubic symphysis, the ischial tuberosities, and the coccyx, or our tailbone. So that's this area here that you see in blue and in green. It is subdivided into two regions, the region in green and blue. The urogenital triangle is the anterior portion, and the anal triangle surrounds the anus. So again, in green is a urogenital triangle, and in blue, the anal triangle. So they both comprise the perineum. So we'll go into the male reproductive system first. The scrotum holds the male gamete or the testes. It's skin covered, and it has two pouches that house the two testes. It is inferior to the abdomen. And the raphe, which is not visible here, is the somewhat indentation line between the two testes that is visible externally. They descend about the 7th month of development in the fetus, and that would be the raphe there. The spermatic cords connect the testes to the abdominal area, and the spermatic cords have blood vessels, nerves, the ductus deferens or the vas deferens, which is part of the duct system in the male, and they exit via the inguinal canal. The dartus is smooth muscle, and the cremaster is skeletal muscle, and they work in concert. Here's the dartus region, and the cremaster is somewhat deeper, but they work in conjunction or concert to raise or lower the testes within the scrotum to maintain the appropriate temperature of the testes within the scrotum at about 1 degree Celsius lower than the normal body temperature. And that's important because the proper sperm development has to occur at a slightly lower temperature than normal body temperature. That's the reason why the testes descend and actually exit the abdominal cavity in the male. Contrasting that with the female gamete, the ovaries, are retained within the female's pelvic area because the ovaries and the follicles with their eggs or oocytes develop fine at the normal body temperature. Excuse me. This shows kind of basically where the cremaster and the dartos muscles are within the scrotum. So looking internally, the testes, we'll look at the structure internally, but they function both in endocrine and exocrine functions. They produce sex hormones, endocrine function. In terms of exocrine function, the male gamete or sperm production. In terms of the coverings, there's a covering called the tunica vaginalis, which lines the scrotal cavity, and it has parietal and visceral layers. So notice here in blue is the scrotal cavity, and externally, should be labeled for us, is the tunica vaginalis, and externally, outermost, would be the parietal layer, and on the surface of the testis is the visceral layer of the tunica vaginalis. And deep to that, as we'll see, there's the tunica albuginea. The reason the terminology vaginalis applies to the coverings on the testis is because of the homologous development of numerous structures in the male and the female. So here's a dissection with the parietal layer of the tunica vaginalis externally, and then the visceral layer of the tunica vaginalis deeper, and then deep to that would be the tunica albuginea, which is labeled here on the diagram. And the deeper tunica albuginea is fibrous connective tissue right on the surface of the testis. And internally, there is divisors, septa, that divide the testis into lobules that house or hold what are called the seminiferous tubules, where sperm production occurs. So the testicular lobules have about 800 seminiferous tubules internally. And here's a cross-section of one seminiferous tubule, and it shows the numerous cells, and some of the cells are sperm cells with the flagella, the tails, and then some of the cells are germline cells, which we'll get into soon enough. So from the testicular lobules with the seminiferous tubules, that leads to what's called the straight tubule, relatively straight, relatively short here, that leads to the ret testis in what's referred to as the mediastinum. And from there, it leads to the efferent ductule, and then to the epididymis. So my picture here is covering that up a little bit. Here we go. There's the lobule, or a lobule with the seminiferous tubule internally, and then these little straight sections would be the straight tubules leading to this area here, the ret testis. Within this area called the mediastinum, and then that leads to the efferent ductule, which carries the sperm, immature sperm, into this region here, which is called, or this structure here, which is called the epididymis, where sperm are stored and where they maturate. And all this is within the scrotal sac. So in terms of the endocrine function, there's interstitial endocrine cells, also called Leydig cells, that produce male hormones, androgens like testosterone, and they're stimulated by luteinizing hormone, which is produced by the anterior pituitary gland. So spermatogenesis and the maturation of sperm. Spermatogenesis is the formation of sperm, and then maturation of sperm is the complete last stages of the development of sperm. We'll cover that. And then, so the androgens, testosterone, help with the development of sperm and the maturation of sperm, and also help with the appearance of the secondary sexual characteristics that become obvious at puberty. Things like increased muscle density, facial hair, the change in the voice, or the drop in the tone of the voice, that sort of thing, deepening of the voice. And then also the androgens like testosterone are shown to be involved in brain development in terms of sexual behaviors and our sexual drive in terms of males. So this is a look within the testis, and one of these oval round structures is one of the seminiferous tubules cut in cross section, and then in here would be the stem cells, spermatogonia, that lead to the production of sperm, which drop into the center, the lumen. But the cells that are external to the seminiferous tubules, some of those cells are the Leydig or endocrine cells, interstitial endocrine cells that are housed within the testis. Okay, so spermatogenesis, the production and process of sperm in the seminiferous tubules. Males produce about 300 to 500 million sperm per day. The steps are, the stem cells are called spermatogonia. Spermatogonium is singular. They divide under cell division mitosis, so they produce two daughter cells. One of the daughter cells is a replacement spermatogonium, so the stem cell that divides produces a copy of itself and what's called a primary spermatocyte. Okay? The primary spermatocyte undergoes development and divides itself under a new type of cell division called meiosis to produce secondary spermatocytes. And notice that the secondary spermatocytes after this first meiosis division are haploid, in the sense that half of the chromosome number has occurred, or they have dropped their chromosome numbers by half, so 46 chromosomes to 23. Then the secondary spermatocytes undergo a second round of cell division to form the spermatids, which are still haploid. And then the spermatids develop themselves into sperm under a subset process called spermiogenesis. And the spermatids lose much of their cytoplasm. They become streamlined. They form a midpiece and a tail, or a flagellum. And they're basically just mobile cells with the chromosomes, the genetic material from the father, in the head of the sperm. The developmental process, spermatogenesis and spermiogenesis, are pushed along by testosterone and follicular stimulating hormone, which is produced by the anterior pituitary gland. So spermiogenesis is development of sperm or spermatozoa from the spermatids. The spermatids, when they first become sperm, they are immature, and then they migrate towards the epididymis for maturation. The structure of the sperm has an acrosome, which is an enzymatic head covering on the head of the sperm. Then the midpiece with mitochondria to help drive the tail or the flagellum. It takes about 9 weeks for sperm to develop from the spermatogonia.